Welcome to this Wildcard report builder tutorial. In this video we'll cover the basics of report parameters and filters. We'll begin by showing how to create a basic numeric report parameter, and then how to reference that parameter in a filter to change the results displayed in the report. We'll explain how to display the parameter value in the report, and also how to deal with what happens when your filters return no rows. Towards the end of the video we'll explain how to use date parameters and how to create text parameters, including how to use wildcard characters. So let's get started. The aim of this video is to show you how to create a report which allows your end users to pass values into it at runtime. So in this example we have 4 parameters which the user can enter values into, and the values that they enter affect the results displayed in the main body of the report in this table. So if I change my search text from the word star to the word king and then click the view report button, that reruns the report and returns a different set of results. We have some extra features, so we have some text boxes here which display the values of the parameters, so that if we chose to export the report it would include the values of the parameters that we've entered. And we've also got a basic error message system, so that if we enter a value which doesn't return any results, the user gets told that rather than just seeing a blank empty table. If you would like to follow along when we create this report, you'll need to make sure you have a copy of the Wildcard movies database, and if you haven't already got that set up, we've got this video which explains how to get that done. Assuming you have done that, I've got a brand new blank report waiting for me in Report Builder, and the first thing I'm going to do in here is create a data source which points to that database. So I'm going to right click on my data sources folder and choose Add Data Source. I'll call this one Movies. Use an embedded connection pointing to a Microsoft SQL server, and then I can click the build button to help me build up the connection string. I'll start by typing in a shortcut to my local host, so /, and then the name of the instance of SQL Server I'm using, SQL 2017. I can then use the drop-down list down here to select my movies database, and then click OK, OK again, and there's my data source created. I'll quickly create a basic data set as well to display some results, so I'm going to right click on the movies data source and choose Add Data Set. I'll call this one Films, and then I'll click the Query Designer button to get a bit of help building up my select statement. From the Tables folder I'll go for the Film table, and I'll select the title, the release date, and the runtime minutes fields. So we have one bit of text, one date, and one numeric field. We won't bother applying any filters here, that's the job of our parameters in the report. So at this point I can click OK, my select statement will be generated, and then OK again, and there's all my data ready and waiting to go. Next I'll add a basic table to display the results of that data set. I'll start by tidying up the report. I'll remove my page footer and then get rid of this title text box at the top. And then I can replace that with a new table, so I can right click and insert table. I'll assign the 3 fields I've selected, so title and release date and runtime minutes. And then I'll just change the width of that title column to make sure it's wide enough to display more of the film title. Just to make sure that we don't encounter the font rendering bug, you'll probably be aware that when you run reports for the first time, you often don't see all the text, although apparently it's worked this time. Anyway, back in the design view, often the text gets hidden when you run the report. So to solve that problem, I'm going to highlight all the cells in the table and then change from the default font to any other font, and then back to the default. Feel free to choose any other font as well if you prefer. I will do some basic formatting for the header cells, so I'll change the background colour and then maybe make the font bold. And then I'll also format the release date in a basic date format, so that when we run the report at this stage, we've got our nice list of films. Now I'd like the end user to be able to filter the results of this report based on the runtime minutes. So looking back at the example I displayed earlier on, I want the user to be able to type in a number into a text box, and when we click the View Report button, for the report to show films no longer than the runtime we've typed in. So to make that work, back in the design view of our report, we need to add a parameter. We can do this in a couple of places. There's a fairly obvious parameters folder sitting in the report data window, but you may find it helpful at this point to display the parameters panel at the top of the screen. You can do this in a couple of ways. You can right click somewhere in the dark grey area and choose View Parameters, and you can also choose to switch that on and off from the View tab in the ribbon as well. Once you've got the parameters panel displayed, you can now create your first parameter in a couple of different places. You can either right-click on the parameters folder in report data and then choose to add a parameter, or you can right-click into any of these empty boxes in the parameters panel and also choose to add a parameter. As I've got this box displayed, I'm going to right-click and then choose Add Parameter, and then I have to complete a dialog box to configure it. I'll enter a parameter name first of all. I'm going to call this one max run time. Like the names of fields and the names of datasets, don't enter spaces in the names of your parameters. This is how we're going to reference this value later on in the report. The next thing we can do is enter a prompt. This is what the end user will see written next door to the parameter when the report is running. So here's an example of the prompt: enter the maximum runtime. So that's what I'm going to enter into this box. So you can include spaces and punctuation characters, etc. So I'll say enter the max run time. The next thing we need to do is make sure we've selected the correct data type. Eventually, we're going to use this parameter's value to filter the runtime minutes field. And it's vital that the data type of the parameter matches the data type of that field. The runtime minutes field is an integer. It's a whole number. So I'm going to select from the data type drop-down list integer. And that's all we need to do at this point. So I'm going to click OK, and then you'll see your parameter appear both in the parameters panel, but also in the parameters folder. Just in case you needed to modify anything about your parameter, you can do this in a couple of ways. You can right-click on the parameter either in the parameters folder and choose to view its properties, or do the same thing in the parameters panel and choose parameter properties, or even more simply, just double-click on the parameter in either position to reopen the properties dialog box. At this point, if I run the report, we should see that our parameter does indeed appear at the top. The display is ever so slightly different when we're testing our report in Report Builder compared to how it will look when it's finally deployed, but the actions it performs are still the same. The actions the parameter performs at the moment are, well, basically none. We can type in any number we like into this box, but when we click the View Report button, it has absolutely no influence on the report whatsoever. So that's our next job. We now need to refer to the value of the parameter in a filter which affects which rows are displayed. Let's head back to the design view of the report, and we've got a couple of choices for where we can add our filter to affect the results displayed. If you've watched earlier videos in the series, you'll be aware that you can assign filters to individual report items. So for example, I could select a cell in the table, right-click on the grey box around the outside, and choose to view TableX properties. There's a filters page here to which I could add a filter which references this parameter's value. The problem with doing that, of course, is that the filter would only affect that single table. If there were other report items, they wouldn't be influenced by the value of our parameter. It might make more sense in this case for the parameter to affect every report item that's based on the same dataset. So I'm going to cancel from this dialog box, and instead I'm going to right-click on the films dataset and choose Dataset Properties. There's a filters page on this dialog box. I'll just very briefly mention the parameters page on this dialog box for a dataset. This parameters page has nothing to do with the parameter we've just created. This is to do with query parameters, which is the subject of the next video in this series. So we'll ignore that page confusingly for now and focus on the filters page instead. I can choose to add a filter. I can reference the field whose value I'm interested in comparing against my parameter's value, which is runtime minutes. This then gives you a good clue as to which data type you should have picked for your parameter in the first place. So if you needed to go away and change that, you can do so by reading the value here, integer. I need to change the operator to a less than or equals to, and then for the value itself, I want to reference my parameter. I can click the FX button on the dialog box to open up the expression builder, which you'll be very familiar with, again, if you've been watching previous videos in this series. I'm going to head down to the parameters category and then simply double click the only parameter I've created so far, max runtime. And you should see that its value is entered into the expression builder like so. Having done that, I can click OK and then click OK again. And this time when I run the report, if I do enter a value into the parameter, let's enter a relatively small value, 100, hit the View Report button, I'll see that my films have now been filtered based on the value I've entered. You can also reference your parameter's value in other parts of your report, and a common place to do that is in a page header, which displays the parameter's value in a text box. The reason you might consider doing that is if you're likely to export your report's results into a different output format, the parameters panel isn't included in that export. So to make this work, let's head back to the design view, and I'm going to right click off the page of my report and choose to add a page header. What I can then do is add my max runtime parameter by either inserting a text box manually and then referencing that value, or even more simply, clicking and dragging either of the two parameters that I can see from the parameters panel or the parameters folder. Just drag it directly into the page header. At that point, if I run the report and I type in a number into the input box, hit the view report button, I've encountered the font rendering bug, of course. If I head back to the design view and then select the text box, switch from the default font to any other font and then back to the original, and then run the report again. Let's try that one more time. 1, 2, 3, and I'll see the parameters value displayed in that text box. The value itself or by itself isn't particularly meaningful to somebody reading this report. So let's add some extra text which describes what this value is. So for example, we've added on this, the example I showed you earlier on, no longer than the value of the parameter and the word minutes. So back in the design view of our report, we can add some extra text into this box simply by clicking into it and positioning the cursor using the arrow keys. No longer than, and then I should have increased the width of the text box first so I can type that in properly, and I can click at the end of there and the word minutes. I'll just position that up in the top left hand corner and then run the report one more time, and then whatever number I type in when I click view report gets included in a phrase which makes it a little bit more meaningful to the person reading the report. It's possible for an end user to enter a value into the parameter which returns no results. So if I enter a small number like 12 and hit the view report button, I see an empty table. The headers still appear, but I get no rows. Now, it's fairly obvious in this case that it's unlikely that there will be any films with a maximum runtime of 12 minutes. But if your user isn't that familiar with the data, it might appear to them that the report hasn't worked properly. So instead of just showing the empty table with the headers, we can replace the table with some kind of warning message which explains that there are no results to be displayed. Back in the design view, this is a property of the table, so I'm going to start by selecting my TableX1 object. I can just draw a rectangle around part of the table to select it, and in the properties window I'll see TableX1. If you don't have the properties window displayed, you can go to the View tab at the top and then choose to display the properties window. In the properties for a table, there is a section devoted to what happens when there are no rows to be displayed. So there's a no rows section right here. I'm interested in the no rows message property. So I'll find that sitting here, and at a basic level I can just type in a simple bit of literal text, no results to show or something along those lines. So nothing complicated there whatsoever, just a piece of literal text. That will be triggered automatically if I run the report again and type in a small number. Let's go for 1 and press enter or click view report, and instead of showing the empty table, it replaces that with my message. I can do some basic things to format that and make it a little more descriptive. So back in the design view, if I have the table selected again, find the no rows section, you'll see that there's a color property. This affects the color only of the no rows message, so I'm going to change that to red. I can then also expand the font section, and I can maybe change the font to bold as well. I could choose different font typefaces as well. If I didn't want Seago UI, I could go for Arial, which is the standard font I'm using in the other parts of my report. I could also modify the message so that it's not just a simple little bit of text, it refers to the value of the parameter. So in order to make this work, I've got a little bit more effort to put in than I did for my header text box. Here I need to write an expression which will concatenate the value of the parameter into a longer string. So I can click on the drop down arrow here and then choose expression, and then I'll just take away whatever's in there already and replace that with an equals operator. and then in some double quotes. So for my literal text, I want to say something like, there are no films shorter than, and then I want to concatenate the value of my parameter. So after I've closed the double quotes, I can type in an ampersand and then head to the parameters folder and then double click the max runtime parameter. And then I can concatenate another piece of literal text. I'll concatenate the word minutes to the end of that. Once I've done that, I can, let me just zoom in so you can see that a little more clearly. There we go. Having done that, I can hit OK. And then if I run the report again, I can type in a small number, hit the View Report button, and I'll see that I get a slightly more descriptive message with a different font and colour, but that disappears automatically when I type in a valid value and the table itself is displayed. Let's add a couple of extra parameters which allow the user to select a date range. I can head back to the design view and I can add my parameters either by right-clicking the parameters folder and choosing to add one, or if I'd like to control exactly where the parameter will appear, I can right-click into one of these empty boxes in the parameters grid. If I do this from the parameters folder in the report data window, the parameter that I create, which I'm going to call this one start date, and then the prompt will be something like pick start date, and the data type, hopefully fairly obviously, will be a date time. If I click OK, the parameter appears in essentially the next available empty box. But if I don't like where it's being positioned, I can simply click and drag it from the current position and drop it into any of the other empty boxes. If I wanted to add more boxes, I can right-click onto any part of this grid and choose to insert more columns and more rows. So for example, I can insert a row below, and I can also remove columns and rows that I don't need. So I can delete some columns here to tidy up the parameters panel. I'll add a third parameter then. I'll add an end date parameter. So I can right click into this empty box and then choose to add a parameter to it. I'll call this one end date. Sorry, no spaces in there. And then for the prompt, I'll say pick end date. Set the data type to a date time and then click OK. Now again, I'll need to make sure that I reference those parameter values in a filter which affects the results displayed. So I can right click on my films dataset and choose dataset properties, head over to the filters page and then add a new filter. For the expression, I'm going to choose release date, which will set the data type to its correct type, date time. You may notice a little bug. This has been in Report Builder and reporting services for years. When you revisit the filters dialog box, it appears to have forgotten what the data type of that field is. It resets it back to text. It isn't a problem. You don't need to do anything to solve that. But if it did bug you, you can just reselect the field and it will reset back to the actual data type of that field. Anyway, back to the release date filter. I'm going to change the operator to say between, and that means I can now select the start date and the end date parameter using the two FX buttons. So I'll hit the FX button here, head to the parameters list and double click the start date. I can then click OK. Then I can click the second FX button, head to the parameters list and double click the end date. I can then click OK, and there's my filter created. The filters on a dataset, as you will know if you've watched our earlier videos, apply cumulatively. So this will be essentially joined together with an AND operator. This condition must be met and this condition must be met in order for some results to be returned. If I click OK at that point and then simply run the report to see what happens, I've now got 3 parameter values to fill in. I'll enter a relatively large value for the maximum runtime, 200, and then for the dates I can either type in my dates or I can select them using these basic calendar controls. If I click on the little calendar here, a little tool pops up and I can navigate forwards and backwards through 1 month at a time and click on a date to pick it. I can also navigate or scroll in larger increments of time by zooming out, and I can do that by clicking on the calendar header to zoom out to higher levels, which allows me to navigate far more quickly through larger periods of time. I can then click onto a particular decade and then a particular year and then a particular month and then finally a particular date. It's kind of a bit of fun the first couple of times you do it, but you rapidly get bored of that. So it's also worthwhile knowing that you can just type in your dates into these boxes, and you can do it in a variety of formats as well. So you can use the regional settings of your computer and type in your date in your regional date format, or you can enter less ambiguous things. Sometimes it might not be obvious which should be the day and which should be the month, if you're switching between UK and US dates, for example. So you can also type in dates in formats like so. So you can type in a number for the day and then a short name of the month and then the digits for the year. When you hit the View Report button, the date will be resolved to your regional settings, and then you'll see the results appear and match the date ranges you've entered. It's worthwhile just briefly pointing out that this calendar control behaves a little differently in the deployed version. If I switch back to the previous example, there is a calendar control you can click on and you can select dates from it, but you can't quickly zoom out to higher levels by clicking on the calendar header, so it's a little more fiddly to use. We can also reference our date parameters in a text box to describe to the user what we've selected if we were to choose to export the report. Let's head back to the design view, and I'm going to start by dragging the start date parameter into a new text box in the header of the report. I'll then just increase the width of that text box so I've got some space to type, and then reposition where the text box sits. Before I start typing, I'm going to change from the default font to any other and then back to the default font just to avoid that font rendering bug. Then I can click into the text box, position the cursor at the beginning of the text box and then say released between, and then after the start date I can type in the word and then I'd like to drag the end date parameter from the parameters folder. So as long as I go directly into that text box without coming into contact with any other object in the report, that will allow me to do that quite easily. It's probably worthwhile formatting your placeholders for your parameters just to show you what I mean by that. If I run the report and I type in some numbers and then just type in some dates quite quickly, and then let's go for the first 2000. Oops, not 12,000. That's a little further forward than I intended to go. So you'll see that the values that appear for the dates in the text box have the default format, which is date time, and it's pointless including the time component here. So fortunately, I can format those two date placeholders quite easily back in the design view. I can click onto one of the date placeholders and then select the date format for that, and then do the same thing for the end date and apply the date format to that as well. So the end result is a little neater when we view the report. Let's go for a different date range this time. So you'll see that we get the dates formatted according to our regional settings. For the final parameter, I'd like the user to be able to type in the film title and include wildcard characters in that so that they can find patterns of text. So in the example I showed you earlier, we can include asterisk symbols around the text we type in to find text which contains a value, or I can position the asterisk at the beginning of the string to find films which end in that particular piece of text. Or I can also, when this finally resolves, I can also include just the asterisk after the word I've typed in to find films whose title begins with that string of text. So quite a lot of flexibility. If I just wanted to return all of the films, I can just enter a single asterisk into the text box, and that will return all of the films regardless of what title they have, but of course still based on the other parameters values we filled in. So to do that, let's head back to the design view of our report, and we can add a new parameter. So I'll right click my parameters folder and choose to add a parameter, and I'll call this one title text, and I'll change the prompt to say something like enter title text, and then a quick hint in a set of round brackets, asterisk to show all, or something similar to that. We don't need to change the data type, of course. The title column contains text data. So once I've done that, I can click OK, and there's my parameter created. Now I need to create a filter which will use the string I've typed in, including the ability to search for wildcard characters. So I can right click on the film's dataset and choose dataset properties, head to the filters page, and then add a new filter. the expression will be the title column. I don't want to use the equals operator here. The equals operator doesn't treat wildcard characters correctly. What I want to do is use the like operator. And if you've ever written any SQL queries, then you'll be familiar with the like operator. So I can say like, and then for the value, I simply want to reference my new title text parameter. So after clicking the FX button to launch the expression builder, I can click on the parameters category, double click the title text, and then click OK a couple of times to build my filter. Having done that, I can run the report, and I'll just quickly type in some numbers. Let's go for 150, and then I'll go for a date range. Let's go for the 1st of the 1st, 1990, and then I'll just quickly go for today's date by picking that from the list. And then I can enter some title text. I'll enter the word star written inside a pair of asterisk characters. So we're using asterisks for our wildcards because the filter is being interpreted in the Visual Basic language of Report Builder, not SQL, as the query wildcards would be using. So if we were using SQL query wildcards, that would be a percentage symbol, but we're using asterisks because of how the filter is being interpreted. So if I click the View Report button, that's going to find any film that contains the word star anywhere in its title. Again, just to demonstrate, if I changed that so that the asterisk appeared at the end of the string, that's anything that begins with star. If I put the asterisk at the beginning of the string, then that's anything that ends with the word star. There are no films with that, so I could maybe change the word star to the word king instead, so that's any film that ends with the word king. And of course I can just type in a single asterisk to show films with any text in their title, providing they match the other criteria we've typed in. This text parameter works quite nicely, providing your users know how to type in wildcard search strings. If they didn't know how to do that, life is a little more difficult. So we could help out the end users by making sure that whatever they type into this input box is always enclosed in wildcard characters. So for example, if the user typed in the word star, that would automatically be treated as a contains this 4-letter string star. To make that work, we need to go back to the design view and modify the filter on our films dataset. So I can right click on films and choose dataset properties. And then on the filters page, I can head to the title text where we've got the value of the title text parameter. If we click the FX button to launch the expression builder, we can then simply concatenate some wildcard characters around whatever the user has typed in. So I can, in some double quotes, enter an asterisk, use the ampersand then to concatenate that with the title text value, and then concatenate another asterisk at the end of that string. So no matter what the user types in, that will always be enclosed in asterisk characters. So essentially we've written an automatic contains filter. If I then click OK and click OK again, I can run the report, and I'll quickly check this time with a 150 and then type in a date, 1990 or something like that, and then go for today's date quickly. And then whatever text I type in, I can type in the word star and hit the View Report button, and it will automatically be treated as a contain. So you'll see the word star in several places in the string. I can do the same thing with a different search string just to prove that it still works. So anything that contains the word king, the 4 letters K-I-N-G, anywhere in its title, including some Twilight movies, sorry about that, it will still work. So it's nice and flexible and easy for the end user to work with. We just lose a little bit of flexibility now because we can't write things which contain something or find things that is exactly equal to a string. It will always be treated as a contains. All that remains now to complete this report is to add an extra text box to display the value of the title text parameter and reference these extra values in the no rows message. So rather than doing that as it's just repeating things we've already done, I'll just point back to the original example I showed. So we'd have another text box here which shows the value of whatever we've typed into this text box. And we could also expand our no rows message so that it will show the values of the runtime and the start date, end date, and title text parameters. Just one quick thing to mention on that. If I wanted to change the no rows message to show the date in a formatted fashion, I do need to do a little bit more work yet again to get it to appear in a particular format. So I'm going to head back to the design view of my existing report, and then I'm going to select my table and find the no rows message that I created earlier on. I'll click on the drop down arrow and I'll choose expression. So I've already got the part which shows no films shorter than the max runtime and the word minutes. I'm just going to expand that by typing in a comma after the word minutes, and then released between, followed by a space, and then after the double quotes, I'm going to concatenate the value of my start date parameter. Now, if I just concatenate the raw value, it's going to be formatted with the date and the time again. So rather than just referencing the parameter's value directly, I'm going to use a format function to change the way it's displayed. Again, if you watched earlier videos in the series, you'll know several options for doing this. I'm going to very quickly use the format function, so I can double click on that from the text category, and then back to the parameters list, and then double click the start date parameter, and then type in a comma, and in some double quotes, type in the format string I'd like to use to change the way that date is displayed. So we'll go for a nice simple day/month/year, close the double quotes, and then close the round brackets. So that's what that looks like. If I then concatenate another piece of literal text after that, so the word and then concatenate format, open some round brackets, end date, comma, in some double quotes, dd/mm/yyyy. Close the double quotes and then close the round brackets. And of course I could then just continue concatenating the value of the title text parameter as well. But just to demonstrate this small part, if I click OK and then run the report again, I will very quickly fill in a small number. It doesn't really matter which dates I pick here, to be honest. I'll pick today's date for both. And again, it doesn't matter what text I type in. The aim is to make sure we don't return any results. So once I've done that, we can see that we get the release dates, or the start date and the end date included. I should have picked a different value, I suppose, just to prove that it is formatting two different dates. So there we go. So there's the basics of using report parameters to allow your users to enter a value and to affect the results displayed in the report. Hope you found those basics useful. Thanks for watching. See you next time.